Now recording.
And I'll start. Also, if I'm not mistaken, your time is limited as well, right, BG? So
yeah, it's not too important. I thought something was happening today, but it turns out I'm not really constrained, so it can go past an hour if you guys want.
Okay. Okay.
So first of all, hello everyone.
Hello.
Yeah.
I'm not having much of a public usually, but I always say hello.
Hello. Yeah. We have anyway. I haven't started recording yet. If there's nothing else, yeah. Sorry. So I'll start in 3, 2. Sorry, could you say something anyway, just to check whether the audio works at the last moment?
Hello.
Yeah.
3, 2, 1. 3, 2, 1.
Yeah, it works. So let's start in 3, 2, 1. Let's go. All right. So
hello.
Hello everyone.
Hello.
So today we are going to talk about metaphysics. I guess in particular, thoughts. Maybe you could start with describing your, I guess, traditionalist metaphysics. I don't know if you would describe it as such, but yeah, you can take it from here.
Well, sort of. I wouldn't. There is many things people can talk about when they say they are traditionalists. For instance, they may say they are perennialists, like some of the 20th century, some of the intellectuals of the time, such as Julius Evola and René Guénon, for instance. I wouldn't define. It is a bit. I wouldn't define myself as a perennialist, for instance, or anything like that. And we had a conversation about this subject, I think, or was it only on the server by Britain when I did the Let's Read that book from Sri Yukteswa. Do you remember, student?
Yes, I do remember that. Basically, the point was that so it was this Hindu intellectual, I guess, who was trying to say that the Bible and every other text said the same things, which is his faith seemed to say about metaphysics, but obviously the differences are too deep. You can't really construct capital T traditionalist metaphysics which fits together with all the traditions, so faiths, or whatever you want to call them.
Yeah. One point that I had of criticism of that book, as I remember it, was that basically his vision for a unified religion of the universe was more or less Hinduism. With, however, we will also call Jesus a guru, basically. And yes, I feel like such movements, such as perennialism, fall out into some kind of often provincial kind of thinking, like everyone is supposed to follow the perennial tradition and everything else, which is passed from the ancients. But in the end, this perennial tradition, curiously, is, Hinduism or Islam. Usually not Catholicism, because Catholicism has its own claims on that point of view. So, yeah, what is the point with this? I think that traditionalism is very ill-defined, particularly when we talk with boys on the internet, more or less. So I think we should start with asking BG a few questions to understand exactly where you come from, if that's okay for you.
Yeah, sure.
So I can tailor the response, more or less.
Sure, go ahead.
Okay. First of all, would you define yourself basically as a reductionist, materialist, and positivist?
I think these words are meaningless.
Okay.
I mean, you can try to define them if you want, and I can, Mm-hmm. Like, what is the definition of materialism, for example?
Materialism is the philosophy of creation that states that nothing exists except one substance, which is matter.
So the laws of nature wouldn't exist, like the laws of motion wouldn't exist?
That is a very good point. This is a criticism that I have against materialism. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's an absurd notion. I don't think anybody is a materialist or has ever been a materialist. Maybe some people thought they were because they were confused about the nature of knowledge, but I think you'd have to be very confused to believe that you're a materialist in that by that definition.
Well, this is a very important question and answer, because basically you revealed that you agree with me on half the stuff, basically.
Sorry, what is that?
Basically, you said that you agree with me with most of my metaphysics.
Oh, I don't know if I agree with you. I mean, I haven't really heard too much about it. I
basically start with it. No, you know.
Well, I would say that I think the term metaphysics is also extremely misleading, because I don't think we can. I think I think it's confused to believe that what you're speculating about or theorizing about in these matters is reality as opposed to the presuppositions of subjectivity. So I think most of what goes
absolutely a good point.
Yeah, I think most of what goes under the label metaphysics really is reflexive, and it's about theorizing about the nature of subjectivity, the inescapable constraints of our awareness and will. It's not necessarily about reality, and metaphysics makes it sound like it's about reality itself.
I would agree that you can make many assumptions. You can confuse the map with the territory, basically, and make many assumptions that don't collide with what actually happens, let us say. I would absolutely agree with that, especially in metaphysics. But about this, how would you define exactly the word metaphysics when it pertains on philosophy?
Well, like I said, it's a word I generally avoid because I think it's got a misconception built into it. I prefer just the word philosophy. I mean, I think a lot of what passes as metaphysics, or what's called metaphysics, is epistemology, or theorizing about the nature of knowledge and the relation of the human subject to reality, and the fundamental presuppositions of thought, things like causality, time, space, logic. And these are maybe the inescapables, or at least we can theorize that we're sort of, we are beings that have these things built into us. So really theorizing about our nature and the limits of our thought when we engage in this activity. And I don't think we should confuse it with understanding the fundamental nature of reality.
Okay. Would you be interested in listening my definition of metaphysics?
Oh,
which is derived by reading like Aquinas and people like that. My definition of metaphysics would be that, to cut many things short, metaphysics is the philosophy and the study of your assumption, basically. I start with the idea that the same idea that Aristotle expressed, basically, in his physics, that any model of the universe must start with assumptions, which are the same as what in mathematics you would call axioms, basically. And metaphysics, I would say, is the philosophy of studying your own assumption, basically.
I would probably...
What would you think about this definition?
I would mostly agree with it. I think there might be a sticking point about whether we're talking about assumptions or presuppositions, like whether we're talking about something explicit that has an explicit existence prior to, like that we have these as explicit assumptions, or that we are discovering things that are not really explicit assumptions, but the nature of thought itself. So like, I don't think we have the idea of causality, but our brains generate causal models. Causality is built into the way we think, but it's not like we have an explicit assumption about it. And so some of what we're talking about is bringing these things that are implicit in the nature of thought into awareness and making them explicit. But we should be careful not to confuse what we're, the theory, again, it's like, I guess, map and territory, the theory of the self with the self. So I don't think we depend on such assumptions to think, but we can say, okay, what are you could say axioms or presuppositions of thought. That is thought becoming aware of itself, developing a theory of itself, etc. So I just want to make that distinction.
You are aware of, however, of the fact that the main philosophy of modernity, basically, it's materialist, more or less, reductionist.
Well, it can't be.
Basically, it's based on not even accepting the idea of metaphysics, what you would call positivist.
Well, I can't agree to that, because I think you already agreed that materialism is a meaningless notion. So how could the philosophy of the modern...
I would say, however, that most people around don't seem, with most people around, I mean most people around that try to write philosophy about thinking, about epistemology, and so on and so forth, which is the intelligentsia, the kind of people who, although are often considered crackpots in their own time, end up influencing thought in the generation future, let us say. I will say that in about the 20s at least, and the current hasn't exhausted now, they have been like this, more or less. That is the kind of philosophy they had.
I don't agree. I mean, I don't think anybody is like that. I think maybe there are people who applied that label to themselves for various reasons. Like Marxist thought used the label dialectical materialism. I'm not really sure what that's supposed to mean.
I see the misunderstanding. I'm not saying that they are right. I'm saying that this is what they think of themselves and their philosophy and the world.
I understand. I'm saying I don't believe that they're really material, that they fit your definition. And I don't know exactly what they're using this word to mean, but Marx believed in some sort of historical progression, right? From, say, feudalism to capitalism to communism. Well, that progression is not matter. That law of history is not matter. So if Marx could not have believed your notion of materialism, at least if he did, he was extremely confused. And I would say that I don't see many people calling themselves materialists. Sometimes this comes up as a rejection of the supernatural. And so people will reject the supernatural, and the term for that would be naturalism, I guess. But I don't see many people rejecting the laws of nature, or that order exists, and in fact, I would argue that most people...
I agree that they are confused, because have you spoken with many Marxists lately? Because I do.
Well, I don't meet any...
And they get mad when they say that their philosophy is not materialist. When I'm making exactly the same argument that you are making now.
I don't know what their conception of materialism is, but I mean, and also I guess I would take exception to the notion that modernity has a philosophy. Because I think the ordinary person has no philosophy.
Absolutely agree.
Yeah, they're just, their beliefs are very simple, ordinary, and they are mostly based on conformity and intuition, right? So
there's people who shape the discourse still.
There are people who shape the discourse, but then what the ordinary person gets from it is not some notion, some philosophical notion, but some kind of, moral position or whatever, or just an idea of...
Basically, like the sense that life is meaningless, for instance, you can get from there.
I don't think I think almost nobody believes that life is meaningless. There are some existential nihilists, but I would say that the vast majority of people believe that they have this intuitive and also, to some extent, media-based hedonism. They have a basically hedonistic conception of meaning and purpose, which is that meaning is based on their feelings, their experiences. What is good for them is to feel good, and what is bad for them is to feel bad. And of course, these feelings are not matter, and so I don't know how they could reconcile that with this notion of materialism.
They do think the feelings are matter because not most people, because most people don't think about it, but the people that shape the thinking of most people absolutely think that their feelings are matter, and they will get fucking mad. You tell them.
Well, I think most people in the modern world, well, I'm not sure if it's even true of most people, but the scientific understanding of feelings is that they are caused, they're, created by the brain, and so they are material in that sense. Now, again, that doesn't mean that they're just matter in motion. That's a very strange straw man that would eliminate all understanding.
I would freaking agree with everything that you say. But it is, it is not the reality of most conversation that I have. You know what I mean?
Well, if you're talking to an ordinary person, they could never engage in this kind of conversation. So they don't have any idea. If you ask them, honestly, if you ask them what causes the seasons, they would have no idea. So you're not going to get a coherent theory of, anything out of them, but
for most people, they don't have the slightest idea how electronics work, and they use it constantly. It might as well be magic for them.
Right. Science and technology essentially is now playing the role of magic that magic played in the past, and to some extent has taken on a religious significance to most people. But I wouldn't say that the ordinary person, or even that these academic intellectuals are materialists in the sense that you defined it. Like, let's take somebody specific, like Pinker or Sam Harris, one of those guys. They believe in order, some kind of order in the universe. And order, regularity, laws of nature cannot be material, right? Qualia, the experiences, might be caused by material events, they're caused by matter, caused by matter obeying the laws of nature, let's say. That's what I believe anyway, and that's what they believe, I'm sure. Yeah. However, that doesn't mean that they are equivalent to it. So
again, we are at an impasse in this conversation because, having conversations with new atheists and such people, basically, I'm saying most people, and when I say most people, I'm saying obviously the thinking of most people is influenced by people that consider themselves the elite, basically. And the people that are convinced of something are part of that thought shaping elite, more or less.
So we have been moving in circles. Thoughts, could you define the word teleology?
To be short, is a thing having a purpose beyond the simple, beyond coming forth beyond the simple mechanics of its existence. For instance, when I studied the course of biology in the university, they told me about the dogmas of biology, by which a cell, a form of life to be such properly so defined, must move toward nourishment, acquire nourishment, escape harm, and substantially reproduce. Now, this is in philosophical parallels is the teleology of a cell, basically. Nothing in the cell itself, beyond its mechanics, tells you what it will do. It will tell you what it is equipped to do, which is derived from its teleology.
Yeah, well, biology has both in it, right? I mean, we understand it in terms of cause and effect.
Yeah.
But because biological forms have been selected, through the evolutionary process, this creates forms with functions. So teleology is built into biology, but it is not a mystery how it is built in. It emerges through the process of evolution.
Are you familiar with the concept of emergent properties?
Yeah, it's exactly. Biology is an emergent level of order on top of physics.
Yeah.
It supervenes on the order of physics. It does not reduce to it descriptively.
Well, I had people tell me that because of emergent properties, basically the cell has no meaning. I had people doing this to me. You know what I mean?
Well, that's an odd. I don't know why somebody would say that. That just sounds confused. But maybe they mean a single cell in the body. I don't know.
Most people and most thinkers, particularly in modernity, are fucking confused.
Well, I'm sure of that. I mean, that's not something I would debate. Most people are confused because, we don't have a coherent, rational worldview. We have a worldview that has emerged over time. We have had an explosion of rationality in certain areas in science, technology, and economics. I'm not saying the science of economics per se, but the operation of the market has generated enormous, efficiency of production. So we have expanded rationality in many ways, but we have also put some things off limits to rationality. And we also have irrational conceptions that conflict with our understanding of human nature. I mean, morality is one of them, religion is another. And as long as we have these conceptions, it's very difficult to form a coherent, rational worldview. I think you can see that in people like Sam Harris and Steven Pinker, who are struggling to reconcile their religion, essentially, with the scientific worldview. And they're failing because they can't let go of their quasi-religious beliefs.
Again, people get mad when I call it a religion, but it is. It has heaps of philosophical, of metaphysical assumption that most of its adherents simply don't analyze.
Yeah. Well, it inherits a lot, actually, from Christianity. You can see that in Pinker's books, things like The Better Angels of Our Nature. Even the word enlightenment is a religious word. It's about, a kind of, it resembles the notion.
I would define it as this enlightenment of this philosophy of modernity and so on and so forth, to define it quickly as an heresy of Christianity. And I would say the same with Marxism.
Well, you could say that, sure, but these things do sort of come out of that worldview, and they have this unexamined substructure of preconceptions, and that's
exactly what heresies are. That's why I use the term,
Sorry, well, I didn't...
Actually.
I just didn't hear what you said last, if you could just repeat it.
I'm saying it is just what heresies are, basically. That is why I often use the term when referencing, for instance, Marxism or the modern cult, let us say.
Well, I guess that's a different way from what I think of a heresy as simply a rejection of a core tenet of a religion. I'm not sure that it must come from the religion itself, but maybe that's the case.
The definition by itself is that it comes from the Greek. It comes from the word hairesis, which means choice, which implies in context that we are talking about people that pick and choose what they're going to believe in the context of Christianity instead of believing in the entirety of the revelation. For instance, an agnostic heretic would wouldn't believe that the God of the Old Testament and the God of the New were the same God, for instance.
Yeah, I'm just saying, I don't know if that's the normal usage, regardless of the etymology, but whatever. We can go with that.
I looked it up, it is, don't worry.
But,
So,
well, I was just going to say, I mean, like, there are also heresies against the modern religion. Like, one of the biggest heresies against what I usually call humanism, that's the word I use for the religion of the modern world, this, unproclaimed religion, this quasi-religion. One of the big heresies is that people are not equal, right? That races are not equal, that men and women are not equal, that individuals are not equal. This is a heresy.
Absolutely.
Because it is a rejection of a core tenet of that religion. And as an aside, just you might find this an interesting point, that one of the strengths of humanism, this modern religion, is that it is not declared as a religion. And so it gets privileges that other religions don't get. Like, it can be in advertising, it can be in government. You can fly the rainbow flag from your embassy, but you couldn't put the cross on your embassy, right? No major corporation would advertise with a Christian theme, but they all put the rainbow flag on their Twitter handles and things like that. So it's kind of it's like a crypto religion in a sense. It's not recognized as such. It passes as, rationality and decency, right? That's what the claim is. But it consists of unexamined assumptions, many of which are inherited from Christianity, and some of which are sort of more modern, somewhat generated by the modern environment, like to some extent, generated by TV. I would say, like TV. Right. As a communication medium. Anyway.
Right. So, sorry. Fox, could you define substance dualism and substance monism?
Okay, yes. This is an issue that came up in philosophy, basically, at the time of the early Enlightenment, basically, because having rejected Saint Thomas Aquinas and his philosophy, people were confused about the presence of one or more substances in the universe. Substances being something irreducible, basically. What is the problem? That they couldn't reconcile mind and matter. So it was two main thinking schools, basically. One thinking school one thinking school that recognized only one substance, which could be matter, but could also be mind. Those that would only recognize mind will become the romantics later. And those that, like Descartes, Cartesio, will say that would hold to substance dualism, basically, by which the universe has two coherent and irreducible substances, which is spirit and matter, and they are in contact somehow, but they can't intermingle. And what was the claim by Descartes? That basically the soul resided physically inside the pineal gland or something like that. It got goofy pretty quickly, basically.
Yeah, I think Descartes...
This is interesting because it is a problem that in traditional philosophy doesn't freaking exist. Because it is assumed that any form of mind or matter or any irreducible substance basically comes down to a substance that which we don't really know and which was posited to be called quintessence, more or less. René Guénon speaks long and hard about this and about how the Enlightenment is in complete error because of this and so on and so forth. I'm not obviously as adept as René Guénon, but this is more or less the resumed version of the debate between substance monism and substance dualism.
Okay, so with regard to Descartes, he came up with this idea that the pineal gland was the point at which I guess the world of spirit or soul interacted with matter, and that everything was mechanical beyond that.
Yeah.
And I think this is obviously a very strange worldview that doesn't really nobody holds to now, but the notion of substance is a metaphor, right? It's a metaphor.
Basically, yeah. The traditional philosophy goes to solve the issue simply positing quintessence and solves the problem. You know what I mean?
Well, my point is that it's a kind of a bad metaphor to think of. To try to say everything is matter, and then and think of things that aren't matter as metaphorically matter. Now you have to posit another substance. So that's one of the problems there. That it isn't, there is order in the world. Even motion is not substance. Time and space are not substance. Causality is not substance. It doesn't make sense to metaphorically think of these things as substance. And
I agree.
By the same token, I don't think it makes sense to think of subjectivity as being another substance, or use this metaphor of a different type of matter as if subjectivity is just another type of objectivity. So the thing that makes subjectivity is perspective, which is not a substance. It's like an existential condition, right? So qualia are not matter because they have this perspective tied to them. That doesn't mean that that they're totally correlated with material events. Like, I'm not saying that there's some, this is where it gets confused, to think there's some magical substance
that could cause a qualia. Is a qualia caused when you're dreaming, for instance?
Well, sure. The point is, there's some brain event that occurs that is the objective correlate of the qualia. But what makes the qualia is that I'm experiencing it, that it is, part of my personal subjectivity, that I have the perspective on it. Whereas I could look at myself as an object. Maybe I could see my brain in a scanner and observe an event, right? That event itself is not the qualia because it does not have the perspective attached to it. And in the more modern way of thinking about the, mind-body distinction, things like the hard problem of consciousness are typically used, right, to raise this, I think, kind of paradox that's very difficult to get beyond, which is that it seems strange to think of ourselves as objects, and when we look for the subject in the object, we don't see the subject. We just see the objective correlates of the subject. But that doesn't mean that the subject isn't 100% determined by the object. It just means that it is, again, sort of existentially different.
Right, disagree, but there's at that point might be simple perspective or simple starting from other basic assumption. Since we agree that there is such thing as a basic assumption of metaphysics.
Well, I'm not sure what you mean. Can you just repeat that? Because I didn't quite understand what you said.
I'm saying that the only part I disagree with you so far with is that the subjective is determined, mainly with the word determined, entirely by the objective.
Right. You might believe that there's some other, and we can call it a substance if you want, but there's some other realm of causality, I guess you could say, that interacts with the objective realm.
I need the substance because, again, I'm not taking the position of Descartes. I'm taking the position of people such as Grosseteste or Aquinas that resolved this kind of issue, basically, with positing an actual, irreducible and unknowable virtual substance, basically, so you could go on talking about philosophy.
Sure, but again, this is a metaphor, right? It doesn't solve the problem. What it does is
I'm not saying that quintessence is, is a material. You know what I mean? I'm saying that all things that appear as substances reduce to a thing that I can't exactly know, what I would call quintessence. So we can go on with our lives.
Sure, but my point is that what this does is it kind of dodges the actual nature of subjectivity by pretending that it's just another type of objectivity. And this is something people typically do because...
You could say the opposite. You could say that this dodges the problem of objectivity by claiming it is another kind of subjectivity. In the same way matter reduces to quintessence, also mind reduces to quintessence.
No, I don't know what I'm not sure what you're saying there. What I'm saying is that to understand the subject-object distinction, we're not really helped by pretending that subjectivity consists of some other substance. This doesn't solve anything. It just kind of pushes the problem off or pretends that it is solved. Like if you have a hard time understanding why does a certain firing of neurons, correlate to the feeling of, or the experience of seeing the blue sky, you would have the same problem if there were some other type of substance. You could also say, well, why does this movement of the ether or quintessence or whatever correspond to the subjective experience of seeing the blue sky? Now, all you have done is taken it into another realm, so you can't ask the question because you have no access to the data of what's going on in this, quintessence or whatever.
I could have, not directly by direct experimentation, but I could have, for instance, through intuition, through revelation, through other avenue of knowing, basically.
Well, intuition, I mean, it's not. We're always intuiting. There's no other avenue to knowledge. We're always using our brains, right? I'm not sure that there's, unless you...
When I reason things one by one, step by step, I'm not intuiting them.
Oh, you are, of course. Every step is intuitive. Maybe the reasoning is not. Thought depends on intuition. It must. There's no other way it could work. And intuition is just the subconscious mental processes. So because they're below the level of consciousness, we're not aware of the internals of the process. We're only aware of the output. Like recognizing, a horse.
The control of the output and the control of the information, if I have enough information. So when I make a reasoning, following each step, I can't be said to be using intuition because I'm following each step. Intuition is when, by previous knowledge and accrued experience of in previous moments and so on and so forth, I am skipping steps.
No, intuition is immediate. It's just immediate and subconscious. So, for example, if you recognize a pattern, that's typically immediate and subconscious. Although you can cogitate on something and eventually recognize a pattern. But my point is that thought is this conscious process that leaves behind a memory of the steps, and that's what makes it thought. It's also slow and it's exploratory, right? It doesn't just come to one definite answer. It might consider possible answers and leave things in an indeterminate state. But every step of thought is intuitive. So thought depends on immediate, automatic, subconscious events that generate the steps.
Okay, let's put it in another way. Would you agree with Hume when he says that you can't prove any of the single steps of reasoning, you can only intuit them?
Well, I'm not sure what Hume said, but you can't prove anything ultimately. There's no deduction is just deduction, and it depends on premises, and there's no way to get any conclusion out of deduction without premises other than tautologies. Absolutely. Right? So you can't prove anything.
I don't think that there is anything bad with that. That is just what I call proof.
Yeah, it's just the nature of deduction.
Because that is the means that I have at my disposal.
Right, but the thing is, what makes you recognize something as a valid or invalid step in a deduction is intuitive. It's an intuition.
Well, I can have a methodology, for instance.
Sure, you can write down a methodology, but then you're going to depend on your intuition to judge the methodology correct or incorrect. I mean, you can't get away from using your brain, I guess is the point.
Yes, I absolutely agree that I can't get away from using my brain. That is more or less the things, what I'm saying.
Okay.
I'm just saying that there is modes of using the brain. I can do a formal reasoning. I can do a formal argument. I can intuit something. I can have an altered state of consciousness in which other things that weren't clear in a normal state of consciousness are now clear.
Well, perhaps, or you could have a delusion or make an error or whatever, right?
Yeah, you're sure that I can also fail in that.
Right. So the point of like careful reasoning is simply to make the intuitive steps very simple, so that and then to make them also accessible to our like to bring them into memory, sometimes to put them on paper, so we could in theory do them over and over again to check and recheck, and so to decrease the probability of error down to basically zero. That's what mathematics is, or formal logic, right? When we think, we don't think in formal logic. We think in a way that involves many leaps, many intuitive leaps and stuff like that.
And day to day, I don't think in formal logic, because I will be Dr. Spock.
Well, yeah.
I can decide to think in formal logic if I need to make an argument.
Right, but the point is, like, the way you make decisions in ordinary life involves mostly just pattern recognition. That's what most intuition, at least of the type we're talking about here, is simply pattern recognition.
Yes, it's what I was calling skipping steps.
Right.
Because you have previous experience and so on and so forth, as I said, and so you are skipping steps. Obviously, we are imagining, we are making a map of the process of thought as making a step, making a step, and making a step. Obviously, this map is not 100% unless I make the effort to think like that, which I can, but...
Right, so an example would be you see the head of a horse looking out of a window, and so you naturally leap to the belief there's a horse inside the house. Now, you might be wrong.
My intuition could be wrong, because it could be a guy with a nose mask.
Exactly, right. So you leap to that belief because that's a natural, intuitive leap, and that's based on pattern recognition, right? And of course, you could question that consciously, say, well, wait a minute, maybe, why is there a horse in that house or whatever, right? Anyway, so the point is that pattern recognition is just, another mental operation, and one that is, that we rely on all the time. Like, you can't...
I'm not questioning that. I'm questioning the idea that it is wrong to trust this kind of mental operation, basically, as long as it is the means that we have, basically.
Well, I think you were claiming that there's some kind of special quality to intuition, or some sort of special ability to intuition that allows you to know things that you can't know by some other means, or that there's a special type of intuition.
I can't conjure knowledge from nothing, but I can know something. But as you said yourself, I can know things that it's not immediately evident that I know, and those things may become evident in by intuition, by other means.
Sure, but my point is that the way you know those things is by pattern recognition, like the substance thing, right? It's an example of fitting something to a pattern, maybe not accurately, like saying, well, we have this stuff, and then you start thinking about it. Now you have to turn it into an object of thought, so it seems more like a substance, and then it's very natural to start using that kind of metaphor to think about it, and that's all based on pattern recognition, essentially, that you recognize.
I recognize this instance as a fallacy, and I'm glad that I don't do it, because Aquinas didn't do.
Well, I'm not even saying it's a fallacy. I'm just saying that it's a metaphor, and metaphors are based on pattern recognition. They're not based on any special conduit to some external source of knowledge. So I guess the question is, do you believe we have a conduit to some other source of knowledge? Like, this is what many religious people believe, that
in some special occasions, I think we do.
Okay, so you believe in a supernatural source of knowledge that just comes to us from some other place.
I think that the definition of natural and supernatural is pretty based on what we know. Things can appear supernatural and be natural otherwise. I simply think in terms of what exists, what necessarily must exist for the things that do to exist, more or less, and therefore and what doesn't, more or less.
Okay, but what's... Well, I don't know. I mean, I'm a little bit confused now. Like you were saying, are you saying that there is some special source of knowledge about metaphysical claims? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, in some cases you can go ahead and make metaphysical claims by definition that we did before, basically, that we talked earlier, by this special source of knowledge. I question that the term to use to call it is supernatural, because I think of things not in terms of natural or supernatural, but in terms of existing and non-existing.
Okay, well, what I would say is that the way we arrive at these, metaphysical notions or philosophical claims about ourselves or whatever is by the same mental processes we use for every other type of knowledge.
I'm not questioning the mechanics.
Well, I'm just saying that that's my position, that we can theorize about ourselves, we can develop theories of ourselves, and that within those theories there will be constructs, and those constructs might be things like memory, logic, and also things like, causality, time, space, and so on. And I don't think there's any special source of knowledge involved in generating such a theory.
That is your prerogative.
Well, that's my theory. It's just another theory, right? I'm just saying that's my theory. I can explaining in my theory. So I don't see any need to posit some other source of knowledge.
Why do you feel there should be a need to posit that?
Sorry, what was that?
Why do you feel there should be a need, like a pressing need at this point, to assume that?
Assume what?
You use the word need, like I don't, basically in the sense of I don't need anything supernatural to explain anything.
Right. So I don't think there is a need for it. Like I don't feel any. I don't perceive any lack of explanation or anything that would be gained.
But why do you think there ought to be a need for this? Considering that it is basically the way people have thought for the grand majority of history.
Well, it may be the way people have thought for the grand majority of history. That doesn't mean that we're compelled to accept it or adopt it if there's a better understanding. I mean, for the vast majority of history, people didn't have any understanding of probability or statistics or physics, cosmology, the theory of evolution, etc. So they were theorizing about themselves, using the conceptual tools they had available to themselves. But now that we know about neurons and evolution and, the earth goes around the sun and all that stuff, I don't see any reason to be using Thomas Aquinas's metaphors or conceptions to theorize about myself.
You say that we had no understanding of statistics and so on and so forth until pretty recently. What would you answer if I say to you that, for instance, quantum mechanics in a philosophical way was more or less thought about at the time of the Egyptians, and that is testified by books such as the Emerald Tablet, and so on and so forth.
Well, I would say, let me see the tablet and the translations of it, and I'll make my judgment.
It's on the internet. It's on the internet, don't worry.
Well, sure, I can check it out. You can give me a link to it. I mean, but I would be very skeptical about that claim because it doesn't sound very plausible to me. But, whatever.
It didn't to me either, but, that is the kind of stuff you discover.
Well, Thomas Aquinas didn't theorize about that, right? And the Catholic Church and the time of Galileo called him...
was mainly interested in theology for obvious reason that it was his job, taking claim, and epistemology and philosophy of knowledge, and so therefore physics.
Yeah, I remember briefly...
Much of the books of Aquinas are basically people having questions, about theology, and Aquinas solving them.
Well, Aquinas was, if I remember correctly, trying to come up with proofs of God so that a religious belief could be established on reason alone. And I don't remember the details of them, but I remember that, of course, they were all fallacious, and those fallacies are pretty well established. But
this is interesting because we go back to Hume that we talked about before, because he was talking about that, about this idea that you can't prove any step of a reasoning, but only intuit it, exactly in the context of trying to disprove one of Aquinas' 5 proofs.
Sure, but so what's the point? I mean, I have a brain that works a certain way, so if I examine Aquinas' proofs of God or whatever, and they don't seem adequate to me, I'm going to reject them, right? And I'm not going to need to go.
What I will do too.
I would reject them as fallacious when I observe a fallacious pattern of reasoning, and I don't have to even be taught it. I can just say, wait a minute, that doesn't seem right. Most of the fallacies that I've learned came up in internet arguments, not, I didn't have any words for them, but I could still recognize them in the past. So
yeah, that is what I will do too. But the funny thing that happened is that when I tried to do this, what I discovered was that the fallacies weren't on the Aquinas' 5 ways. They were in Hume's attempt at disproving them.
Okay, well, I'd have to go back since I haven't looked at them in a long time, but I remember going over them in the past and recognizing the fallacies in them. So
perhaps you remember them. They are, in short, the argument from the first mover, the argument from universal causation.
So I think first mover pretty easily disproved as it's a premise that there must be a first cause, right? And then also, even if you accept
no other causes if we don't have a first cause.
Well, I'm just saying it's a premise. You could we could just say we don't know, right? That is an option. We don't have to say there was a first cause. You could just say, well, we don't really know. We can't find a first cause. We can always
perceive it directly, but if everything has a cause and everything causes other effects, it stands to reason that there is a first cause.
This is a good example of how what we call metaphysics is really discovering presuppositions of thought. So everything has a cause is more like a presupposition of thought. When we think about physical objects, we always
Can you think of something that doesn't have a cause?
Well, obviously not if it's a presupposition of thought. That doesn't mean that's objective reality. It just means I can't think of it because it's built into the way I think, right? So that's a good example of that. So making conclusions about reality based on what I can and cannot think might not be, if it's supposed to be an ultimate proof, that's not a very good proof. And then, of course, the other...
Do you think math describes the universe? That is the claim of math.
Math describes it. It's a description that we use. That doesn't mean the universe is math. So I don't think the universe is math. No.
It doesn't exist because, for instance, Fibonacci's sequences.
Well, I would say it's something we create. I don't think
that is an easy example of something which is pure mathematical speculation, which turn out to have physical consequences.
Well, of course, if we invent math to describe things, then of course we're going to see examples of things that are described by math. That's not surprising.
Yeah.
But going back to this point about...
You know the story of Fibonacci's sequence?
Sorry, what?
You know the story of Fibonacci's sequence?
Oh, well, no, I don't. Maybe I do, but what is it?
Basically, he was trying to predict the growth in population in a...
Oh, was it rabbits or something?
In a world of rabbits.
Okay. Yeah, I vaguely remember something.
It's by starting simply from the number of couples we had in the beginning. Turns out that the leaves on a tree, the blades of grass on the ground, and the spiral arm of the galaxy and everything else basically follows the Fibonacci sequence of progression.
Some things do, sure, because of how they grow, right? Because it describes a property of how they grow. So math
is a thing that exists in philosophy that it was called the problem of math's unreasonable predictability.
Yeah,
Newton,
I think that's kind of the anthropic principle. I mean, if it didn't work, we wouldn't use it. But also, there are many things for which it's not a great tool, and we always make approximations in using it. Like,
I feel, for instance, that infinite recursion math that they are spending so much words today talking about is a bit of a misuse. Because yes, obviously, if you take a set and you put inside the set the whole set again, you are going to have paradoxical results.
Sure, right. That's I think we're going a bit astray, though. What I wanted to...
Sorry.
Well, what I was going to talk about with regards to Aquinas, but also say, we're talking about like whether we must accept the worldview of the past for some reason, as opposed to developing a new worldview. For example, hold on. Just let me finish. So, for example, the Catholic Church rejected the heliocentric model as a heresy, right? But eventually...
Not exactly. But this is a very long story if you want to talk about it.
Well, I don't want to turn it into a long story. I'm just giving examples, right? Where I'm not going to accept the worldview of people from the past without putting it to the test of my own intelligence. I
would absolutely agree with you, and this is what I did. And I found out that it was Aquinas that posited an ordered universe in which, for instance, the scientific method makes sense because you can make sensible prediction by secondary causation and so on and so forth. And it was the Enlightenment and so on and so forth, the humanists, let us say, that were posited that I can't prove that if I kick Hume in the balls, he can't prove that I kicked him in the balls. He can simply prove that I moved my leg and now his balls hurt.
No, well, of course you can't prove it. Hume is right. You can't prove it.
Yes, you can, because his balls hurt.
You can't. That's not proof. That's not logical proof, right? And the point of Descartes...
It is an empirical proof of an empirical problem.
Well, sure, it's adequate empirical proof or evidence to believe that. Like, Hume isn't saying we must abandon...
If Hume were to sue me and call me to court after I kicked him in the balls, and I told the judge, look, Judge, all the guy has is circumstantial freaking evidence because he can't prove I moved my leg and his balls now hurt, but he can't prove that I kicked him in the balls.
Is that the defense that would work in a modern courtroom?
I'm asking you, is that a defense that would work?
No, of course not. Of course not. No, it's not going to work in a modern courtroom because people don't take philosophical skepticism as being a complete rejection of knowledge. Just because Hume, the point of, let me explain, the point of philosophical skepticism is to establish that we have assumptions, that we're making presuppositions. Like, for example, when we see something happen over and over again, and we induce a regularity, that this is not absolutely certain, and also that it's just a method that is, a process that is happening in the brain that does that, and that we don't have absolute certainty that this...
It's not absolutely certain, but we base our science on it.
Of course, all science is based on induction. Induction is not deduction, and even deduction is not absolutely certain. So the point is, all knowledge is based on things that are open to philosophical skepticism. But this is...
Absolutely.
But this does not... Right, but this does not mean that philosophical skepticism is incorrect.
No.
It's just I'm
not saying that philosophical skepticism is incorrect. I'm saying that Hume is incorrect in that specific circumstance, because his argument against the first argument of Aquinas is clearly an argument he didn't think through, because I can disprove him by kicking him in the balls.
Well, I don't think you would be disproving him, but I don't even know what his argument is. I doubt that your empirical disproof. I mean, look, the first mover thing, right? There's two arguments against it. One I've already given. The other is that, okay, even if there has to be a first cause, that doesn't mean God is the first cause. Your notion of God. That would be compatible with any notion of a first cause, whatever it might be. So I find this is a very common pattern in theist argumentation, that they will...
Because this is a theist argument. Aquinas is not trying to prove Jesus. He's trying to prove that it is reasonable to think of things in terms of God existing.
Yes, but you could also say, this is where the flying spaghetti monster comes in, or any other notion. Because you could say, well, the flying spaghetti monster was the first cause, or whatever, or the first cause is just... Like, even if this established that the universe must have a first cause, that's all it would establish. Oh, the universe has a first cause. Not that there's God, but that there is some kind of first cause to reality, let's say. Now, I don't even think it establishes that, because that's a presupposition.
Would you be comfortable with?
What?
What other kinds of first cause would you think about in this case?
I wouldn't think of any, because I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't even go down this road, because I would just honestly admit we don't know. We can't really know what happens before, beyond the limits of our actual knowledge, beyond the limits of our evidence. And of course, the other problem, there's three fallacies involved here. Of course, the other problem is that it just takes for granted that God doesn't require first cause. So it's fallacious in those three ways, of which, the one that's most obvious is that God then becomes this inexplicable, uncaused thing, right? So you could just as easily say the universe doesn't...
No, nothing. I'm sorry, go on.
I mean, if God doesn't require a first cause, neither does the universe.
No, because they are different.
Well, you're just making up something, calling it God, and saying, well, it's a special thing that doesn't need a first cause. Well, that's just making something up.
I'm simply positing the first cause. If he's the first cause, he doesn't have a cause before, because he's the first.
Okay, so why would you need to have God be the first cause? Why not just say the universe is its own first cause?
This is where you enter in the realm of revelation, but...
well, yeah, this is where you enter the realm... No, this is where you enter the realm of making shit up, where mysticism, mysticism is a claim to knowledge that's based on an appeal to ignorance. It's saying, I don't know what happened back then, so I'll just make something up and say it's true. And that's what it is. We don't know how the universe was created. We can't possibly know if there's another bigger universe or any of these things.
This is why revelation is special, because we know, because he told us.
Right, so, and revelation is just an appeal to ignorance. It's like saying, or it's an appeal to special knowledge, but it's really just an appeal to ignorance. It's saying, well, you can't disprove my revelation, so I get to say whatever I want. That's all it is.
saying quite the opposite, that I can prove my revelation, you know.
Okay, well, there's no reason for me to believe it, right?
No.
Okay.
It's not about forcing people to believe in it, obviously.
Right, but there's no point.
It's about having a coherent view of the universe.
Well, I don't see how it becomes more coherent by positing an imaginary being.
I don't see how it becomes more coherent, not positing a first cause, when everything we see has a cause.
Well, again, I've explained, like, that's a presupposition of thought, so I might just say, well, you know, all I can imagine is things that have causes, but it might be that my imagination is limited, my knowledge is limited. And so part of a coherent worldview is admitting that you have limits to your knowledge, that you are ignorant, we are ignorant, and the religious people believe that too, of course. So I would say that that's an important part of having a coherent worldview, is saying my knowledge has limits, so I don't, you know, if somebody comes to me and says, why don't you know that? I could say, well, because my knowledge is limited. I don't have access to data about that question, so I can't really give an answer to it. And I don't think...
Which is why, if I didn't believe in revelation, I would be an atheist. I agree with you.
Yeah, well, fine. I mean, so like that. This is the core point. Right?
But the reason that you believe in revelation is because of things like disproof, right?
Yes, amongst other things, that it is one of the reasons why I believe in revelation.
But BG doesn't seem to think that, like that, even if you believe that there was a first cause, that necessarily proves your revelation in particular, I guess.
Yeah, so then the revelation has to stand on its own. This is not the Aquinas argument.
Right.
Aquinas is making a general argument. It's not trying to prove Jesus directly.
Okay, he's not making he's not proving the existence of God with reason, I guess is the point. He's not proving it with evidence and logic. So that's the point. If he's claiming
specifically the Christian religion,
well, if he's
proving that in general, it is reasonable to think of things in terms of a God existing.
It's only reasonable if you have that assumption fixed in your brain and you can't really think without it. If you've never had that assumption, it seems absurd. I've never had that assumption. It seems absurd to me.
How many assumptions do we have?
Sorry, what?
How many assumptions do we have in society? I think the assumption that things are caused by other things is pretty reasonable to have compared to the assumption that, I don't know, qualia don't freaking exist because it's all matter in motion.
Well, I think...
Which is the assumption which I have to contend with when I talk with new atheists and people such as this.
I don't know what specific arguments you're having with people about qualia, but the point is that, like, the belief in the Christian God, like the notion of God itself, to me is absurd. Okay, I couldn't believe in it no matter how hard I tried, because it doesn't make any sense. So I could give logical disproofs of God that would not be fallacious, whereas I can find the fallacies in these, proofs of God from the Middle Ages. And the reason they seemed reasonable to somebody like Aquinas is because he had a very strong bias toward the belief in God, which made it seem much more credible. And he didn't consider, well, maybe Satan is the first cause, or maybe the seven-headed pig is the first cause, or whatever. He just didn't even think about that, right?
God is simply posited as a first cause because he says so.
Well, if God...
yeah, so I guess, Biju, how about you provide, proof that there is no God then?
Yeah, well, conceptual arguments against God. I mean, the notion of God is typically anthropomorphic, but then taking human abilities to an extreme. So God is conceived of as a subject that has will and awareness, but the will is infinite and the awareness is infinite. So he is omniscient and omnipotent, right? He is all-powerful and all-knowing. But these concepts in themselves are absurd, because knowledge depends on the limits. Knowledge is only meaningful if there are limits to knowledge, right? When we say, well, I know that something, this is in contrast to the things I don't know. If your knowledge was exactly the same as reality, then there would be no distinction between knowledge and reality. And that does not describe, that's nothing like human subjectivity. Human subjectivity is by its nature limited. Will, again, the point of will, it's more evident perhaps with will presumes that the world isn't always going your way, that you have limited agency, that you're pushing against opposing forces, you're trying to do things. And of course, God, if he had no opposition, if his will was simply reality, if everything that he wanted was reality by, de facto, then the concept of will is meaningless. He couldn't have a will because there'd be no distinction between will and reality. There'd be no wanting. The reason we want things is because we're tiny little beings created by evolution, struggling to survive in a world of which we have limited knowledge and on which we can, in which we can only do so much. So we need to be motivated to push against adversity, to struggle, right, to build things, to do things. God would have none of these properties. So to conceive of a mind, a subjectivity, as having infinite will and awareness is in itself a kind of conceptual contradiction. I guess I'll let you respond to that if you want.
Well, you are basically objecting to the fact that God isn't human.
No, I'm saying that the concept of will is incompatible with omnipotence, and the concept of knowledge is incompatible with omniscience. And subjectivity...
People can have other wills than God. God allows them to have wills different.
That's not what I'm talking about. I'm just saying, God would have nothing to do, right? Could there be a problem for God?
Not exactly, but
right.
We will make them.
Well, how could we make them?
By willing things that are not God.
Okay, but God's will, if God's omnipotent, then nothing can happen that isn't his will.
He allows people to have wills different from him.
Okay, well in that case, it's his will that we do things that are against his will. So that's a contradiction, right?
It is not a contradiction when he allows it.
Okay, so then it's not against his, so then nothing we do is against his will. It's his will that we do things. And how could an omnipotent and omniscient being allow free will? What would that even mean, to allow free will?
Why wouldn't he? He is omnipotent and omniscient.
Well, because he knows everything we're going to do, and he has the power to...
You can decide things that are different from him.
He knows what we're going to do. He has the power to make anything happen that he wants to.
Yeah.
Okay, so what does it mean for him to allow us to have free will? When he already knows everything we're going to...
Not doing it when you don't allow him.
But what does allow mean?
Because he cares about you.
See, this is a metaphor that comes from society.
He allows you to make mistakes, for instance.
Yeah, this is a metaphor that comes from society, right? It's about the law. It's about a governor allowing people to have freedom within the law.
It's completely different. You can do things that are perfectly legal and perfectly subject to social approval, let us say, and still not doing the will of God.
I mean,
And this was so in antiquity as it is now.
Yeah, I'm pointing out that the origin of this notion is a metaphor. It anthropomorphizes God. But this anthropomorphization is based on analogy to a finite being with finite will, finite awareness, and it doesn't work when you try to expand those things to infinity. It becomes absurd.
Anthropomorphized himself and became flesh. That is my claim.
Right, well, I just think that's absurd. I mean, that's another absurdity. That's a more blatant one, but...
It is absurd, except for him.
Okay, well then, I mean, so you understand why I'm not going to believe any of this stuff, right? Because it's just absurd. And to me, it's just insane. There can't be an infinitely powerful...
Trying to convert you. The point of this conversation was having a conversation about the generalities of metaphysics and so on and so forth. And philosophically, we agree on much. We agree that most people are freaking confused by their assumption, for instance.
Well, I think part of the reason we agree on so much is that normally, I think theists apply a straw man to their to the opposing side, and also very few people, like materialism, nominalism, these words, and very few people are prepared to actually have a philosophical discussion. And certainly,
but most people are prepared to follow blindly what the guy in the big screen tells them.
Sure. Just like most people were, willing to follow what the church told them in the Middle Ages or whatever. Yeah. Sure. People are sheep, sure. But that's, I'm just saying some of our agreements are simply that we are both capable of having a philosophical discussion, right? We both have thought about these things to some extent, whereas most people have not.
Well, are you a biological determinist in that you think that genes determine whether I can hold an opinion or not, for instance?
Well, I don't think genes determine a specific opinion. I think genes determine the brain. The brain interacting with the environment determines beliefs. Mm-hmm. But it's not like
I will contest only the use of the word determine, but yeah.
Well, obviously people with similar, brains, similar genes to mine, living 1,000 years ago would have had different beliefs. I think that's pretty straightforward. But that doesn't mean that genes do not affect belief.
Affect is another thing entirely. I can agree with that.
Okay. Well, then I think you would be considered a biological determinist by a lot of people, to some extent anyway. I mean, that is a bit of a heresy.
Because I use the word affect instead of determine.
Well, effect, it means partially determines. It doesn't mean completely determines. That's the only distinction.
It means that there's many things that affect one thing in particular, in this case behavior, amongst which I can say, there can be genes.
Right, so effect it just means cause and effect. It's a causal term. So determine and effect mean the same thing.
I'm saying affect, not effect.
No, but affect with the A is just a way of saying if X affects Y means that X causes this effect on Y, or causes the effect Y. And determine means the same thing.
So what you're saying is that what Fox is saying is that behavior is partially determined by genetics.
Right. The point of, the word affect implies partial determination. Determines is often used in a more absolute sense. Like, if we know X, we know Y, absolutely. If we know the genes, we know the opinion. But
the case is partial. I can agree with partial determination, with influence, if you want.
Yes. So basically, basically it weights the probability towards a certain outcome, but does not make it certain that it's going to be that outcome, I guess.
Yeah, or it might be an enabling. It might be an enabling condition. For example, whether your car starts will depend on the starter motor, the battery, whether you have gas in the tank, right? And so a certain outcome can depend on multiple causes.
So why is that a heresy?
Well, it's not a heresy. I'm not sure. No, it's a heresy these days in the modern humanist worldview. It's a heresy to believe that genes have any significant effect on the mind, really, because the mind is kind of sacred now. The mind has become the new object of worship. The human mind, human feelings, these have become the new object of worship. So it's become heresy to question them, or even to inquire into their nature, because they're holy, right? Anything that looks at human nature is sort of it must come to a certain conclusion. That's because human nature has now become the new I don't know what to call it, the idol, or the focal point of religious belief.
Idol is perfect.
So, I mean, do you believe that people need to have some kind of idol or another?
I think this probably, I think most people need guidance. They need a direction. They need a sort of script that they can follow in life.
And why don't you think that could be Christianity?
That's a very good question, yeah. Well, I think because the world has changed and Christianity does not provide solutions it does not promote solutions to the problems of the modern world, because the problems of the modern world are very different from the problems of the past. So,
yeah.
I mean, the claim, if you remember, of that post which I posted on your server was that basically it is abandoning Christianity which has led to the problems to begin with.
Right, and
but you disagree with that?
Yes, I profoundly disagree with that. I think abandoning Christianity is more a side effect of modernity, like partially a side effect of modern knowledge, scientific knowledge, but also to some extent a side effect of changing communication media. Like the printing press changed religion in
absolutely. You wouldn't have Protestantism without the printing press.
Right.
Which is to say, without people reading the Bible and only the Bible, without the theology, and making up stuff, basically.
Right, and I would say a new type of religion emerged in the late 20th century that was TV-centric, that, television kind of created a new worldview, and that now that's being shattered by the internet. So these things, they come and go, but the problems of the modern world come from the successes of the modern world. I think this is counterintuitive to most people.
No, I would agree.
Okay, you're agreeing with a lot of what I believe.
Yes, we are in a strange situation, isn't there?
Well, yeah, it's not a bad situation.
Absolutely not. I'm very happy.
For example, we could take something like birth control. It gives people a new type of agency. And there's nothing wrong with having more power over your life, more control over your life. There's nothing intrinsically wrong with having this power, but we didn't evolve to wield that power. We didn't evolve to have that choice. We evolved in a world in which sex caused babies. So if we adopt this technology, we're changing the environment to which we're adapted. We're becoming profoundly maladapted to the environment. People are behaving in maladaptive ways because they have this new technology. Another example might be opiate drugs. If we had easy access to them, almost everybody would become an addict, and that they would destroy their lives. So there are
So why don't you think, Fox, do you think that Christianity has a solution for this, or do you think not?
Solution to the problem of
birth
control.
For example,
It's something people have done since the dawn of time. Chastity, as in the virtue of.
Yeah, but
and what is the problem with that?
Even in times of Romans, I would suggest people were fucking around without any care in the world, despite the possibility of having babies or not. Although at the time of the Romans, I suppose there was some kind of birth control. There was that herb, I don't remember the name, which was basically bred to extinction because people were fucking all the time. And we are in a similar situation now, I would say.
So, BG, why don't you think chastity could be a solution for this issue?
How would chastity solve the problem of low fertility?
Of little fertility?
Low fertility.
The virtue of chastity prescribes that you have sex inside the sacrament of marriage.
Yeah, I get it, but
so instead of that, you wouldn't need contraceptives.
Right.
Except obviously if you are already have 3 babies and you don't want a 4.
Right. So the thing is, first of all, when people have birth control, then the consequences, the risks of casual sex, as they perceive them, are much reduced. And so they start to resent this prohibition on promiscuity, and they reject it. And religious belief doesn't protect people from low fertility because it doesn't give them a reason to have children. And they can very easily just say, well, yeah, I'm still a good person.
It gives me a reason to have children. God said in Genesis to go forth and multiply.
Yeah, God said many things. And then there's words by Jesus later about what makes a person. I can't remember the details, but I don't know my New Testament that well. There are many different things said in the Bible, but like
about Paul when he says when he talks about if you are married, stay married, but if you are not married, don't marry, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, there's a lot of anti-sex, anti-natalism in Christianity. It had
and that is because it is out of context. He's talking with other priests.
Well, I think it's because it evolved at a time when this wasn't a problem. When people didn't they needed to be prevented from having sex and having children out of wedlock, but they didn't need to be encouraged to have children. So that's it's an example, right? Without an explicit desire to reproduce, an explicit belief that reproduction is good, there is no reason to reproduce. Christianity, just because somebody said to Abraham or whatever, go forth and multiply.
Somebody, God himself.
Well, sure, but there's so many things in the Old Testament, right? And the most religious, the most Christian countries have some of the lowest fertilities. So it is not functioning.
Because it is the same countries that have embraced Enlightenment virtues, that have embraced humanism.
Well, it's the least humanist countries that are the worst, some of the lowest fertility, like Poland.
Such as?
Poland, Portugal. Yeah, well, I wouldn't mention, like, Eastern Europe is a bit of a mess, partly because of communism, but Poland has a very high level of professed Christianity and yet a very low birth rate. Portugal also, insulated from communism for a long time, has a very low birth rate. Spain, all...
You're talking about a country which was communist until 30 years ago, and a country which had Salazar with his eugenics program in about the same time frame.
Sure. So but the point is, Christianity is not stable as a set of beliefs. It does not seem to be able to perpetuate itself except by accommodating to the modern religion or turning into it. And so that's one problem. It's not persuasive to people. It's not convincing. And then also there are problems in the modern world, such as population growth, dysgenics, that Christianity cannot provide us with a solution to.
So were you talking before about the problem being infertility? Now the problem is population growth.
I know. It seems counterintuitive, but they're both problems. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
I will agree to that. I think the solution is having families.
Well, sure. I mean, the real solution, that's part of it. The solution, though, also involves controlling reproduction, preventing people from having children who can't support them, preventing population from growing out of control in certain parts of the world and certain subpopulations. So there are many...
You disagree in the means of control.
Sorry, what?
You disagree on the means of control, basically.
Well, I don't think you're going to control people. Christianity has nothing about controlling for these, but I know if we talk about this student will not want to post it. So let's. I'm trying to find a way to say it without saying it. There are many problems that exist in the modern world that come from the new forms of agency and also knowledge. New types of knowledge undermine traditional knowledge, because traditional knowledge had all these delusions baked into it, all these ideas that make no sense now. And the more we know about ourselves, like, for example, the theory of evolution is pretty devastating to Christianity, even though you might say you can make them compatible. But then also, we have...
It's not to make compatible, like the position of the church was always, it's a theory, it's fine. The position of Bill and Ted's Bible Shack somewhere in the Bible Belt in America may vary. but it's because they had Tim Brilliant Ted's awesome Bible Shack.
Well, you said, a minute ago you were quoting the Bible saying he told them to go forth and multiply. But the Bible also has a story about Adam and Eve being formed from a rib and all this other stuff. And evolution totally contradicts this view of human origins, right? So it undermines the authority of these traditional...
I wouldn't say that. I will say that it does in the most superficial level, perhaps. But I wouldn't say that it contradicts anything.
Well, I mean, you can't one moment say that, appeal to a literal interpretation of one line in the Bible, but then at the next moment reject a literal...
The literal interpretation of one verse in the Bible isn't meant to be literal.
Well, but the point is, like, if you're saying we get to pick and choose which lines we take to be literal, then I guess that fits your definition of heresy.
We don't pick and choose which definition, which parts are scriptural and which aren't. We have a field which is called theology, which is exactly about that.
Well, then you have this special people picking and choosing, but it's the same thing. Anyway, the point is that this worldview has been undermined by new forms of communication, new knowledge, and then also we have new types of agency that give us new problems of choice, and old solutions, old ways of life, and old worldviews do not provide a basis for making new choices, like the choice to have children. And I guess the other point I will make, to try to phrase things in a way that's politically correct, Christianity emerged in a world when most children died young. Most children died before the age of 12. Like, the child death rates from disease, hunger, were extremely high. And we now live in a world that is very different, in which almost every child lives to adulthood. And this presents us with new problems, which I will try to avoid talking about in detail, which simply cannot be solved within the worldview provided by Christianity, or within the morality that is framed by Christianity. And an example is that we have to understand that what is good for the individual is not necessarily good for society, right? I mean, there are many things that we have to understand, but I just don't see any solutions in that worldview. I think we didn't fall out of or fall into these problems because we abandoned the religious beliefs. We fell into them. They're new problems created by solutions to old problems.
It is all well and good, but again, I see a simple, cause and effect. When you want to make an historical argument or a philosophical argument or a simple, simple derivation from cause and effect, we can see society before and society after. Some choices being made, basically.
Okay, so
among those choices, there is fundamentally the abandonment from the academic institutions and philosophers at large of Aquinas, which was basically the status quo of philosophy before. And we see that humanism, basically, as you define it, is more or less born there. With rejection, with this kind of rejection, in particular, this kind of proofs from Hume and so on and so forth. So I can't. I'm making an argument as if my argument was I want to turn back the clock to the time when it was like this.
Well,
this is not the kind of argument a traditionalist, as I understand it, makes, though.
Well, what I'm saying,
traditionalist.
Well, what I'm saying is that you can't have one without the other. Okay, and I guess also you're saying that the problems we have in the modern world are caused by the abandonment of a traditional worldview. Would you also say that all the solutions that we have in the modern world, like most children living to adulthood, are also the consequence of a new worldview, the abandonment of the traditional worldview? I mean, you know...
Not necessarily. Yeah, I mean... Because so if I understand what you're saying is that you're saying that it was humanism which led to technological development. If it wasn't for humanism, if we had a traditional worldview, then we wouldn't have had these technological developments.
No,
right?
But you're saying that all of the changes come from a change of ideas. So you're saying that all the problems come from changing the ideas. I'm saying, okay, if you think all the problems come from changing the worldview, then why would you not also believe that all of the solutions come from changing the worldview? All of the things we have now, like modern technology, like antibiotics, like the Industrial Revolution, computers. Mm-hmm. If you're going to blame one thing or attribute one thing, okay. Go ahead.
No, okay, go finish. I'm sorry, I didn't want to interrupt you.
Well, I'm just saying, the simple point is that it's a cherry picking, and we mentioned that student in the channel.
Your server, yes.
There's this tendency to cherry pick and say, oh, look how terrible everything is today. Woe is me, this is all because we abandoned the beliefs of St. Thomas Aquinas. It's like, today, your kid is not going to die. That's a pretty good thing to me. You know, you can have a child and it won't die, and you won't have to bury it in the backyard and have, 7 kids and bury 5 of them.
So yeah, I mean, so basically you are saying that without humanism we couldn't have...
No, I'm saying you're cherry picking.
Yeah, you're sort of saying that, though.
Well, I don't believe it's that simple. I don't think everything is downstream from ideas. I think these things tend to emerge together, and that technological changes often drive ideas. Like I said...
So basically you are saying that if we believe that it all comes down to ideas, then we would have to accept that humanism is what caused the technological development, right?
Well, or at least the abandonment of the old worldview. Right? If you're saying, well, I see this thing happen and then something else happens, well, a lot of other things happened, right? So,
Do you have a reply to that, Furtz?
Well, do you still hold apparently to the idea, though, that the technological advancement was part of the situation? But the technological progress was well into being already in the Middle Ages, for instance. We have clockmasters in the Middle Ages basically discovering longitude and so on and so forth. We have a culture of discovery and working, which is fundamental for the scientific method, basically, which was born in the Middle Ages, certainly not in the time of the Enlightenment.
Well,
before that, in the classic age, it was considered by Aristotle too, which is one of his weak points. It was considered to be under the status of a philosopher to do experiments, basically, to get his hands dirty, which is absolutely not the condition in the medieval world, neither in Christianity nor Islam.
Well,
and also you could argue that we have had many chances to develop an industrial civilization which didn't work out for a variety of reasons. Well in the past and well before the insertion of the ideas of humanism. For instance, the Chinese, right before the invasions from the Mongols, were pretty far ahead on building the first factories, we could say, the first building chains. I don't remember exactly how they are called in English, but those ones.
So, Biju, what you're trying to say is that the problems that we have are not necessarily caused by humanism, but by technology.
Well, I think
something.
I think humanism is a contributing factor, but I mean, the main cause of our problems is the solutions to the problems of the past. It is abundance, it is the Industrial Revolution, it is most children living to adulthood. But then again, it depends on what you define as a problem. And I guess that's another can of worms, but you see similar problems emerging in cultures that are quite different. right? Like Korea or Japan. So the idea that this is all kind of downstream of philosophy strikes me as a little bit...
Japan is a very interesting case because they adopted Western mode of thinking, Western's mode of thinking, basically from humanism already established on, without the previous ideas. And we could argue that some of the problems you see in modernity, some of the problems in modernity are even worse in Japan.
Right, and they don't have this cultural tradition. They adopted a kind of package of institutions and ways of life without any real, without the intellectual history. But like, my view is not that I don't think ideas are that pivotal in shaping history. It might be nice if they were, but I think these things tend to emerge together. Like, again, the printing press is a perfect example. But also, I think humanism is largely the creation of abundance. It's the late 20th century lifestyle. It's TV. Those things created this sort of quasi-religion that we're now dealing with, and we're sort of in a crisis of faith now, partly because it is not delivering on its promises. Like, it promised a paradise on earth. It's much safer to promise a paradise in the afterlife, right? But
yeah, that's agreeing.
Or that the dead will awaken at some point in the distant future, but it's very risky to promise a paradise on earth, and that hasn't been delivered. But then also the internet as a new form of communication is I think, causing the dissolution of almost all assumptions. It's a very interesting medium. It creates a lot of it creates little ideologies, but also has a very powerful trend toward what you could call nihilism, just tearing down beliefs, because almost anybody's beliefs can be attacked on the internet quite easily, and
so
and only the best survive.
Well, let's hope so. I'm not sure if that's true.
Yeah, I mean, so what do you make of basically BG's idea that culture and history are not determined by philosophy or ideas? Progress does not come from that, but it's what's that book by Diamond? Whatever, basically material factors seem to be the determining factor.
Well, in part, I agreed with him because I posited examples of industrialization failing to emerge, partially emerging in some other places. But again, I would point out the fact that they partially emerged. Nobody, except in the West, there was the kind of culture that would allow for the scientific method and so on and so forth. If you leave Confucianists by themselves, they will make a perfectly ordered and perfectly cool society in which you will have a general belief of the goodness of art of most people, and so on and so forth, and in which some traditions will be upheld in a perfect way. But it is not the kind of situation and society and ideas that allow for making the scientific method, because it doesn't. Because the typical Confucian intellectual is similar to the typical Platonist intellectual. He sees trying things out as beneath him.
Well, I think maybe
So basically, I was recycling your argument before about co-determining factors.
Yeah, I think these things grow together. I do think there was something special about Europe, but also a lot of the progress came out of the Protestant societies in Northern Europe, Northwestern Europe, and after the Reformation, and partly I think because of the...
You go to the argument like Newton was lucky to live in England because he would be put at the stake in Italy.
I don't know if he would have been put to the stake, but I mean, the point is, I think that broke down cultural inertia and opened up intellectual progress. It did open up avenues of intellectual progress.
I can agree with part of it, as long as we define progress.
Well, we've had progress in certain areas. I mean, I think, my view is that we have to complete the Enlightenment, not roll it back. That the Enlightenment, yes, we have enlightened ourselves considerably. We have a much greater understanding of the world we live in and our own selves. But we're sort of we're not allowing ourselves to truly understand ourselves or the condition that we're in, like what we are. We're reproducing machines, for example. Our culture rejects the implications of evolutionary theory. It accepts the theory as long as you don't, draw out its implications for human beings and for society and for life in general. So I think we have a way to go about as far as accepting reality and expanding our knowledge. And I think we need a radically new worldview if we're going to sustain modern civilization and continue progress. If we collapse back to the conditions of the past, then I think something like the religion of the past will emerge, but it will probably be a new religion.
We are back to one point we were talking about before, but we didn't go into depth about the claim. You seem to think that the claim of a traditionalist will be to turn back the clock.
Well, what I really think a traditionalist is, and this might be my somewhat idiosyncratic use of the term, but I think traditionalism is an internet ideology. So it's people that profess faith and they use tradition as a signal, a virtue signal and an identity signifier. Like they use it to rally around. They kind of rally around the idea of religion, the idea of family values, the idea of sexual morality or traditional sexual morality. But they do that on the internet and they signal to each other. And the irony is that it's a fashion that has emerged on the internet because of new modes of communication.
That is you claiming that, the motivation of people better than themselves.
Yeah, and I think I do. I think I certainly do understand the motivations of people, most people, far better.
As long as you're honest about it, that's fine.
Oh yeah, I think I think most people have no idea, they're highly self-deceived. I think that's part of human nature.
I mean, to be fair, couldn't people say the same about your group, that it's just an internet ideology?
Well, it doesn't fit that pattern because we're not like virtue signaling around something. Rationality, I don't have a core value. I mean, even rationality, people can question that. People can question anything. I'm not saying you specifically, this group, is traditionalist or, circling around an ideology. I don't really know. It seems you're more interested in talking about anime, but traditionalism as an internet meme, it is an internet meme. People started signaling it very aggressively a few years ago. It became this thing on the internet where people were identifying with...
I guess, what difference does it make whether it's on the internet or not?
Well, because the internet as a communication medium, it generates memes by cultural evolution. Different media will generate different memes. But the distinction here between traditionalism and, say, religion or being traditional is that, your great-grandfather who just lived on the farm and did what he did and, he went to church, he wasn't self-conscious about it. He wasn't, debating people about it. He was just, living it, right? It was a tradition. Tradition is something you get from your parents. It's something you get from your community, and you just carry it on without questioning it. And the minute you start to question it or become self-conscious about it and start defending it or signaling it ceases to be traditional.
So, Foss, do you agree that tradition is something that you don't question, that, the things which is said about
I come to my tradition by questioning.
Well,
because I was raised more or less as a humanist, and I came to the conclusions I came to by questioning that upbringing.
Right, but then I would say to you, it is not a tradition. Because if you reason your way to it, it's not a tradition. A tradition is something that passes down the generations by osmosis, by living in a community, by living with your parents, living in a family. You naturally absorb their assumptions. So it's a frame.
But the tradition still exists.
Sorry, what?
Like there is still a living tradition of people that believe exactly like me. So I simply join them.
I don't think so. I don't think there are very few people who would express what you have expressed in this discussion, right? Most religious people have never read Thomas Aquinas or any of that stuff. They just go to church. They just do their thing. They pray.
But you see, that is the difference between, again, a church and Tom and Jerry's excellent Bible shack. That is, I've joined.
The priest at least probably has read some of the stuff which Schwartz has read.
For instance, he may, but if you listen to, I've gone to church. There's none of this philosophical stuff is in sermons. It's a reinforcement of the assumptions of the faith. That's what church is. It's just speak.
It depends. I have theological discussion pretty often in my normal faith life.
Well, I'm talking about sermons.
If you want to have a theological discussion with your priest, if you want to, you can have. I think because, there have been people, religious people in the past who had these debates and who cared about this stuff, and they were not fake religious people or something. They did like fake Christians or something, right?
Well, no, they were part of some. Like if you take somebody like St. Thomas Aquinas, he was in a monastery, presumably. He was within the church, and so these discussions were taking place in that environment, and they were shaped by that environment, right? They were framed by that. He couldn't, have come to an atheist conclusion, for example, right? But
people have in this situation. It was the precursor of what the university system says it has now. That is the open inquiry of idea.
Well, who are the famous atheist theologians of the Middle Ages?
Some. Well, you could say, for instance, what was his fucking name? Wait a freaking second. Why Pascal comes to mind? Wait a fucking second. What was his name?
Well, it doesn't really matter. It's a rhetorical question.
Spinoza was trained as a theologian.
Sure. Well, Spinoza was a Jew who developed his own.
He was trained as a theologian and a Christian. And he was making the argument from that milieu.
I don't think he was trained as a Christian. I'm pretty sure he was a Jew. I think he grew up in the Jewish tradition. And then he sort of developed his own philosophical...
Went to the university at the time and did the compulsory theological course.
Yeah, that may be true. Anyway, it was mostly a rhetorical question. And of course Spinoza was not an atheist. He believed in God, and he
was at the time.
Well, he had a conception of God in his worldview, so he couldn't have said there is no God.
He has a conception of God that wouldn't be considered as God by the people talking about it, which was the whole problem at the time.
Okay, well, perhaps. We don't need to debate it too much, but the point was that you're.
I actually thought of an example.
I don't accept it as an example of an atheist theologian. Spinoza was a theist philosopher. His conception of God was very abstract, but that doesn't mean he didn't have one, and he probably wouldn't have been tolerated if he was, promoting atheism. But anyway, I'm trying to remember what the departure point was. Good student was saying something about...
we were talking about free inquiry of ideas inside of the medieval age and the evil period in which everyone was close-minded.
Yeah.
And we were talking about.
Well, he was asking about the difference between then and now, right? So whether like somebody like St. Thomas Aquinas.
And we were talking about again the claim, which is your claim is that in the traditionalist's mind, whichever you define him as an internet meme or not, this is okay, like
just as need, but yeah,
yeah, just as need, but the point is, if you think the claim of the traditionalist is that you have to turn back the clock.
Well, it's not turn back the clock, but it's retvern, right? It's restore the sacred thing. So they think that the problems are caused by the decline of the sacred thing, which is to them religion and sexual morality or tradition, and that you solve the problems by restoring it, but they will cherry pick the problems so that they appear to be caused by the decline, right? And then they will claim that they will be solved by restoring the thing. And this is really all about, signaling the goodness of the thing. And that's what ideologies do. They rally around an ideal.
The idea of traditionalism is that the claim is that there is a temporal dimension to things and an eternal dimension to things. And that the temporal dimension of two things can be in accordance to the eternal, or it can be in contrast with the eternal. The situations in which it is in contrast with the eternal is the situations in which the kind of problems that we live now arise.
Okay, so but if we live in the other way, then most children die from starvation. Is that or disease?
I have made the argument before that technological improvement doesn't imply humanism.
Well, you're sure just claiming. I mean, I'm not even saying humanism. You're just saying these problems exist. You're saying if we abandon the tradition, then we get these problems, right? Yeah. The ones you identify as problems, but you don't claim that abandoning it will cause the solutions, the things you identify as good. And I'm just saying this is very typical. There's a holy thing, a good thing, whether it's race, religion, whatever.
I think basically the way to get out of this going in circles that we have been doing would be if thoughts could provide a brief account of exactly how there was these problems were caused by the abandonment of Christianity, because I don't think, because all you're saying is that oh, it's typical, but it's not explaining why that is wrong, and I don't think we can do that unless we have an explanation as to why that might have caused the decline.
Well, I guess also define the problems of the modern world first, that you view as problems, and then say how they were caused by this decline of the traditional worldview.
Each problem by one.
Sorry?
Each problem one by one, or in general?
I think we would have to do in general, or do you want thoughts to speak about a specific problem to make it easier?
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Well, I just don't want it to be something really vague like degeneracy or something like that. I want to be a little more specific. Like, what are the problems you observe in the modern world? What are the problems you identify in the modern world that you believe would be solved by restoring tradition?
I guess we could go back. Unless you have another example, thoughts, we could go back to the birth rate thing. Unless you have another example in mind.
Go back to, I'm sorry, I didn't get it.
It's up to him to define it. I mean, if that's a problem. And I guess also, I mean, there's another layer here, which is why is it a problem? So that's another question, right? Like,
but the current birth rate is a problem because we have right as a people, basically, as a prerogative as living beings, which independently to whatever religion you may ascribe, to go about and react and fulfill the biological imperative, which is eternal, which is the one of reproduction.
So we have an obligation to reproduce?
Sort of.
And this obligation comes from God or nature?
The obligation comes from the teleology of living beings.
So it doesn't come from religion? It doesn't come from God?
Not necessarily, but it also comes from religion.
Okay.
Because God obviously tells you to do things that make sense.
Okay, but the Catholic Church had celibacy as like a higher way of life than the having
for selected people that receive a call and become priests or monks. And even then, it is not exactly a dogma, but ordination of things, a matter of laws inside the church, basically. That is, for instance, if you talk with an Orthodox, the Orthodox priests can marry. They follow the letter of what Saint Paul said about you can, if you become a priest and you are married, you stay married. But if you hadn't married before ordination, don't marry after, basically.
So it's not an absolute obligation. It's just an obligation that sometimes applies.
It is an obligation which has exception for a few selected people that become priests and monks due to laws inside the church.
Okay, so like this emerged. This doesn't come from Abraham or the words of God to Abraham or whatever.
This comes from God saying you should multiply. This comes from the law, the Old Testament. This comes from the development of the argument following that by theologians and the church fathers in the first to third, fourth century.
And then St. Paul said, but you don't really need to, and somebody needs, maybe some people do, some don't, or whatever. So St. Paul changed the rules, kind of, sort of.
Not exactly.
Okay.
He ordained exceptions. He said, we have an organization and we have got to do things in a certain way.
But how do you know that the church can override what God said in the Old Testament? Like, how do you know that Paul's notion that he might just come up with, when he was walking down the road or whatever, how does that override something?
Paul came up with these notions in the context of writing a letter to his disciples in, I think it was the letter to the Colossians, but I don't remember exactly now. And that is binding because it was decided inside of an ecumenical council by the opinion of everyone involved, basically, that was valid and that was a rule to follow.
Okay, anyway.
Following that, however, people started to do whatever the fuck they want at a certain point. And so, about in the 10th century, one of the popes basically said, no, monks and priests don't fucking marry. You don't get nice things because you don't get to inherit church property and so on and so forth.
Okay.
And which is why we have the rules we have now.
Okay, so from this complex process, this obligation with exceptions emerged, and that's why people should reproduce?
People should reproduce because it is the teleology of living beings, because God agrees that it is the teleology of living beings and says so in the Bible, and so on and so forth.
Okay. All right, so that's your argument for why it's an obligation, and how, now I guess the second part is, how does the restoration of traditional belief solve this problem of low fertility?
The restoration solve these problems by basically enforcing, not necessarily through government action, but through moral action by people that will believe, basically, of a sensible family structure in which you have that as many children as you feel you should, basically.
Is that in the Bible anywhere? Where does it say have as many children as you can afford or something like that?
It is not. It doesn't have to be in the letter of the Bible, because it is in the letter of people talking about the Bible in the course of centuries, and all agreed that this is how you should do it.
So it's an emergent norm that isn't really that based on religion. And I think you'll find
an emergent norm which we can uphold, because as Jesus said, Peter, your name is Rock. Because it was Kaifa, and then so on and so forth. I won't bore you with the details of the puns Jesus was doing when talking with his disciples.
Well,
and on this rock I will build the church. What you bind on earth is binding on heaven. So basically, he decided the church would have a hierarchy, and it still has now.
So I think another thing which would be worth explaining, maybe even before how traditionalism would solve the problem, is how did the abandonment of Christianity and the emergence of humanism cause the problem, if that was the cause at all, rather than just material factors. Thoughts?
The problem with the problem with the rejection of Christianity isn't that people suddenly started to fuck around. People had been fucking around since prehistory, and that is, I don't know how anyone can disagree with that. The point is that due to the emergence of the ideas of the Enlightenment and humanism, it was now okay to fuck around.
But we're not talking about fucking around. We're talking about low fertility.
Yeah, and the result is that we have low fertility, because now we have a culture of it's okay to have sex whatever you want, and so on and so forth, and we have contraceptives.
Well, it's contraception that makes the fucking around produce low fertility. It's not the fucking around that causes the low fertility. I mean, you can fuck around and have lots of kids, and there's still people who do that.
If you didn't have the culture of fucking around and you still had contraceptives, what would the situation be? It will be that you would have families organized along the traditional ways, and they would use contraception basically not to have too many children.
Well, I don't see why. I mean, you're saying, well, if we didn't, you're saying that somehow we could have the birth control pill, but the traditional thing would say no fucking around, but you can use the birth control pill in your family to limit the number of children you have. But why wouldn't people then just have no children in their families? Because that's what they're doing now. It's people who are married, who are, they have a husband and a wife both going to work.
People who are married usually have at least 2 children.
I don't even know if that's true. I'd have to look that up, but I don't know that the average fertility is quite low, and it's not just because
marriage rate has collapsed.
Well, marriage has ceased to be meaningful, because marriage used to mean that you didn't fuck around before marriage. Marriage was a license to have sex, and thus a license to reproduce. That's what it used to be. Today's marriage is just a party and a ring and some, it's a ceremony.
Yeah.
So
that's the problem.
Well, I mean, you could say that's the problem, that we've gotten rid of this regulation of reproduction and sexuality. But if you simply regulate the point of regulating the sexuality in the past was to prevent children from being born out of wedlock. It wasn't to encourage children to be born in wedlock. That was taken for granted. That was taken for granted because there was no birth control.
I mean, people were still being born out of wedlock sometimes, and it wasn't looked at as a good thing. I don't know.
Right.
Do you have a
Well, my point is, though, that this social technology, this moral principle of no sex outside marriage, had a function, right? To prevent children from being born out of wedlock. It wasn't to prevent people from having fun. And, however, this social technology did not have a way of boosting fertility inside relationships or inside marriage because it didn't need one. And that's an example of how it's not adapted to the modern world, right?
Well, you still agree that God himself says to reproduce, though? So
I don't agree that God says to reproduce. I'm not sure where you got that from.
Yeah, he says so.
No, I don't think there was. I don't think people had children before because God says to reproduce. I don't think that has anything to do with it.
Yeah. So basically, what you're saying is that even if we could force people to or convince people to only have sex when they are married, we would still have a low birth rate beneath replacement level because of the existence of contraceptives.
Yeah, I think correct? So. Yeah. At least until the evolution corrects that maladaptation. But also, I'm just pointing out that these rules, these principles might have functions. Traditions have functions, but as the world changes, they can become dysfunctional. They can lose their functions. And then the other problem is because they're not given an explicit justification, people can mistake the symbolism and the rituals for the actual thing itself, which we have done with marriage. The point of marriage is not the ceremony, it's not the rings, none of that bullshit. It's a license to have sex. It's a license to reproduce. That's what it used to be. If you had sex outside marriage, you'd be punished.
Ownership of a woman to another man. And sense of ownership of a woman to another man from his father.
Yeah. It's sexual ownership. It protects both sides. It has many functions. The thing is, we got rid of all those functions because we didn't know what they were for. We didn't recognize them as functions. We retained the outer appearance of it while discarding the functions.
You're looking at a traditionalist now.
Well, many people have called me a traditionalist because I understand the functions. But once you understand the functions, you're not doing it because it's a tradition. See, traditions can evolve by cultural evolution over time, right? And traditions...
I can do. I don't see the problem with knowing the reasoning behind, at least part of the reasoning behind my tradition and following that tradition.
Well, then you're no longer doing it because God said so or because it's just what people do. It's just what we do. We get married. Now you're doing it.
No, the argument is that God wouldn't tell you to do something which doesn't make sense. And so there's no contradiction there.
Well,
the fact that obviously there's a reason and it's good for us does not contradict with the fact that there doesn't need to be only one reason.
God could tell you to do things that don't make sense. Because there's no reason why God might not tell you to do things that don't make sense, right? And I mean, it depends on what you mean by make sense. Like, again, if the only point...
There is a reason why God wouldn't tell you to do things that don't make sense. He says so straight and out.
Well, I mean, we can go back to the absurdity of God caring about anything, but we can also say that in the Christian worldview, what happens on this earth is not that important. What matters is the afterlife or God's kingdom.
I'm sorry, sometimes we almost agree on basically everything, but sometimes I think you have absorbed a lot of preconception, let us say, because this is not part of anything.
Sorry, what?
It is idea by which, how are you saying?
That what matters is the afterlife. So you're saying in Christianity, it's all about what happens in this life, in this world. I really don't buy that.
Once you die, you are set. As long as you live, you can choose how to live.
Well, you can be a good, if you're a good person in the Christian tradition, you get this paradise in the afterlife, or something like that.
It's not even about being a good person, because the idea is that we are all sinners.
Okay, if you whatever, you repent of your sins or whatever it is, you might be accepted. I don't know. There are different versions of it even. Like, Protestantism has different versions of it. But they all place the emphasis on the, not on this world. And they all have this attitude toward the world, that this world is like fallen and sort of unimportant, and what really matters is the eternal soul, and so on. So
the word of matter, the word of consequences in which we live, the temporal world, is where you determine the eternity. Because once you are dead, you are set.
Yes, but none of this has any...
There's no time in eternity. You can't repent after you die.
Good student, you're making a lot of crackling sounds or something.
Yeah.
No, because you are making specific claims about what I might believe. And
I'm not making claims about what you believe. I'm talking about Christianity in general and what I can observe about it. That it has this kind of anti-life theme built into it, the rejection of...
It is the most pro-life, this is a pun, but I didn't want it to, but I didn't want it to be, it came out like that. I will say it is the most pro-life philosophy in existence, because literally the central conceit is that it will last for eternity.
Well, but this world is going to be destroyed and remade, or something like that. There's going to be an apocalyptic breaking into history by...
There will be a revelation. Apocalypse means revelation, the making clear of what is or what is not clear now.
Okay, but it also...
Which is pretty different to saying that what is not clear now is everything that is important.
But is there not a belief that at some point there will be a change of history in which God's kingdom is manifest, that, Christ will sort of return or whatever to...
It will be the end of history, the end of
right, so it has an end of history built into it, right? Which kind of implies that...
the end of history that God provides is pretty different from any end of history that a human with his means...
Yeah, you also, your worldview also has an end of history built into it. So
what is my end of history?
The literal end of the human race, I guess.
Well, that's a very different thing. I don't know that there will be. I'm not claiming there will be or whatever. But this notion is not just that this will happen, but that this is the end goal. It's we're preparing for God's kingdom on earth. We're preparing for a new historical phase in which, in a sense, everything that happened before is no longer relevant. I'm saying that this notion that it's really important to reproduce and perpetuate...
It's relevant forever, because if you are in the kingdom of God, if you are in contact with God, you stay there.
Yeah, but I'm saying what's
you want to go back.
Yeah, I'm saying what's the point of doing all these things on earth to build a civilization and reproduce, have children, carry on life, when it's all going to be kind of swept away, or God is going to, change everything.
What's the point of doing anything if you die?
Exactly.
That's not answering the question. We're talking about reproduction, sustaining civilization.
It is the question you are
Sorry,
asking.
what is
the point of doing anything if you die? I believe I don't die.
Oh, what is the point of... Are you asking me? Well, I believe in reproduction. So if I die, I can still reproduce. I can pass on my, my biological form to my descendants, and I can hand over some things to them as well. Knowledge, whatever I can do. Ideally, a functional civilization.
Why doesn't that apply to Christians as well then?
Well, I'm just saying it doesn't seem to. I think we got off on this tangent. Well, I've just made the point that Christianity places the importance. It says the important things are in the afterlife or at the end of history, in the eschaton, and not in what's going on here. And so the idea that it, when you said
again,
right, so,
what is going on here determines the eternity.
Yeah, so I'm saying Christianity to some extent is aphilist. In some extent, it's anti-life. It has this rejection of carnal desire. It denigrates that. It elevates celibacy. It does elevate celibacy. It does denigrate carnal desire. and it doesn't really promote reproduction. There's no, like, you can argue that one phrase way back in Genesis.
You are
that's about
arguing
it.
from Storm here because, from rejection of carnal desire on and so on and so forth. One of the most important mystics of the church is Saint Therese of Avila, which explained the ecstasies, who explained the ecstasies of meeting God, of their making experience of God in sexual terms.
Okay, but what does that got to do with reproducing? There are more words in the Bible about mold and mildew than there are about reproducing. There's more commandments regarding the, garments and houses and skin diseases than there are regarding reproduction.
Because it's so obvious.
Well, it's not because it's obvious.
For modern people.
It's not because it's obvious. It's because it happened by default, because due to human nature, until it didn't, until we developed technology to prevent it. Right? You don't need to tell people to reproduce when they want to have sex.
Yeah, and the claim means that if we had the technology but we didn't have the humanism, things will still be different.
Right, and I'm saying that's not the case. Your assumptions that...
That's so. Sorry,
what?
You have been saying that it is until now.
I don't understand what you're saying.
I'm saying, I just said, if we had the technology and we didn't have the humanism, things will still be different. It would probably be ideal, let us say. There would be probably still problems to solve, because that is the nature of life on Earth, having problems to solve.
I'm explaining why. I'm explaining why modern problems are different, because we have new problems. This is a new problem of choice, the choice to reproduce. Our ancestors did not really have that choice, so they don't have the evolved mechanism for making it. We don't have the evolved desire for children or whatever. So you need to,
You just say that the most common paradigm to life at the time in the ancient world, in medieval world, for instance, was antinatalist, and you're saying at the same time that people didn't have a choice on reproduction. They had a choice of reproduction.
Well, yes.
They could become monks.
Right, but most people couldn't become monks, right? This probably also had profound dysgenic effects, because you're taking the smartest people and putting them in monasteries. But setting that aside, the vast majority of people didn't have a choice to have children or not, because they didn't have control over reproduction. You can only have so many monks, so many nuns, and then the rest of the people are going to be peasants or whatever, and they want to have sex, and they're not going to be able to, even if they had some idea that it was bad. My point is, in a world where sex leads to children naturally, you don't need to worry about promoting reproduction. You need to actually put brakes in the way. You need to put obstacles in the way, but you don't need to worry about promoting it. But in a world where people have the choice not to reproduce, now you have a problem of motivation, of desire, that is not solved by some ancient traditions that evolved in a time when that problem didn't exist, when sex was coupled to reproduction.
The problem wouldn't exist if the tradition was still being followed.
No, you're just claiming that, and you have made no argument to that effect. You just claim it. You just assume that this thing from the past, high fertility, would exist today if the other thing from the past, the tradition, also existed today, but you've not made but one doesn't cause the other.
So basically, if I understand what BG is saying, it's that people only basically mostly ended up with children just because they wanted to have sex, not because they wanted to have children. Now that they have a choice whether to have children or not, just because, so people don't really want to have children.
Well, they don't want it that much, so they don't have very many children. Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
And we have better and better little dogs and cats, cuter and cuter little animals, and all kinds of substitutes for children.
Yeah, so basically what he's saying is that even if people had faith in God and they wouldn't just have children just because the Bible says so. They would still be, even within the marriage, they would be hedonistic and care about having to spend money and time.
Well, yeah, and also the Bible doesn't really say so. It just has that one line. I mean, like, there's so many other things.
I think, I don't know. I mean, I think I would rather trust the Christians on what Christianity
have you
says.
read it? Have you read Leviticus?
Yeah.
Have you read Leviticus?
And also another thing that needs to be said is that I don't see why you're just separating the Bible from the church and tradition, given that it was the church which chose which tests, which decided which.
Well, the church has an evolving tradition.
Bible.
So if you're going to say the church is the evolving tradition of the church, then tell me in how many churches today are they telling people to have children?
Mine.
So the priest is going up there saying you must have children.
Yeah.
Okay, I've never heard
regularly.
Of that. Really? Okay, I've never heard of that.
All freaking Sundays telling me.
You must not go to church that often, I guess.
No, I don't go to church, but I've been to church services and I've never heard anybody mention reproduction. And I mean, you can see evangelists, televangelists, or whatever. You can go to religious channels and watch what they're saying. You're not going to see them telling people to have children.
They're going to tell people to get married, at least.
Well, they might say you should get married.
With the assumption.
I think I've been to church more often than you, and I can attest that this argument comes up not every Sunday, perhaps, but it comes up pretty often that we should reproduce. And arguments are made from Scripture about this. I literally don't understand what the hell you're talking about when you say there is only one line in the whole Bible that says you have to reproduce.
Well, give me another line. I just don't know any others. I mean,
okay. Yeah, and I mean, and I don't know if if it's a matter of how many times it is repeated or. Okay.
Well, I mean, most of the core commandments don't involve anything like that, right? They say, thou shalt not commit adultery. They don't say, thou shalt reproduce. And then the reason for that is that they didn't have to say that, because there was no birth control. It wasn't an issue.
Because there wasn't a dysgenic culture as well.
Well, hold on. And the other...
people did reproduce at the time of the Romans.
Of course they did, because sorry, what? They did reproduce? What did you say?
Well, yeah. Like in antiquity
of course,
the time.
Right, because you don't need to be told to reproduce if you have no birth control. You don't have to want to reproduce to reproduce.
At the time of the Romans, they pretty much had, because I don't remember the name of that herb in particular now.
If you get married,
but it was
if you get married and you have access to sex as a guy and you have the right to have sex with a woman, you're probably going to have sex with that woman. And so she's going to bear you children. That's pretty likely to happen, right?
Yes.
Right, so they didn't need any conscious decision to have children.
Right. So, I mean, putting aside the question about whether the Bible says to have children or not, or whatever, let's just say that Christians believe that.
Then why don't they do it?
So, what's the answer to that, folks? Why don't they do it if they believe that?
I think I do. What can
look at the fertility?
Other answer can be?
Just look at fertility rates.
I think the fathers of the church. I think the Bible itself in various times and so on and so forth.
Today.
Every Sunday.
No. I mean. Sorry. I think. Sorry. What BG says is that if the church says to people to have children, to Christians to have children, why don't they have children enough for Well, but first of all, many people don't go to church.
Because most fucking Christians are actually fucking humanists. They don't take it seriously.
So then, I mean, I guess this also, even if your claim is correct, but I would think if you look at fertility rates, they're quite low even for, like, the extreme Christians, evangelicals and stuff. But even if it's true that if you believe in Christianity, the modern form of it...
Think of people like the Amish, for instance.
Well, the Amish, right, that's a good example of people who do more than just have some belief. They have a whole way of life that promotes reproduction, and they explicitly reject birth control. So they have a whole way of life reinforcing that decision. And that's an example of something that does work, but it's not just the belief in God or religion or Christianity, it's a whole way of life.
Yeah, but the belief is also to be there. Yeah.
Life to me and to Christians in general. At least that is how it should be understood.
Sorry, what?
Huh?
Could you repeat what you said? Thoughts?
No, nothing. I was saying being a Christian should be a way of life. That is how it was understood for the most of history.
Yes, but it didn't explicitly... See, a way of life, every way of life until very recently involved excess reproduction, because that's built into the nature of life. So no religion really emphasizes it. They emphasize marriage, the control of reproduction. They don't emphasize choosing to reproduce.
Your argument is boils down to a tautology, though.
What?
Like, we didn't have this problem because we didn't have this problem. Yes, but
I'm saying religion doesn't solve it.
From which to the solution.
I'm saying religion doesn't solve it because it wasn't a problem in the past, and religion is traditional. Traditions are solutions to the problems of the past. That means they may not be solutions to the problems of the present. That's the point.
I think of the tradition in the terms of eternity.
Wow.
Of the eternity of the human condition. I would suggest that regardless of whatever we invent and build up and so on and so forth, people will be unsatisfied with a lot in life, even in the 30,000 in the grim darkness of the 41st millennium and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I agree. People will always be unsatisfied.
They suggest that they will do things that they know they are wrong, despite knowing they are wrong. I would suggest that they will still know sin.
Well, I don't believe in sin, so can't agree with you there. But anyway, I kind of have to get going pretty soon. This has gone quite long, but
this has got a bit longer than I thought it would be.
Yeah, that's all right. We were a bit discursive, kind of went off on a bunch of tangents, but
it was. I think it was nice and productive, regardless of things. You know?
Yeah. Well, we can pick it up later at some future point. Is there any final thought or statement that you want to make?
Do you have one? Start.
Well, I don't want to open up another can of worms. I mean, I think I've made my statements that the modern world presents us with new problems that we don't have traditions to solve, so we need new solutions, and those solutions can only come from rationality, because rationality is the only thing that can generate them fast enough to save our civilization. And I don't think that the abandonment of traditional religion or sexual morality is the cause of all of our problems. So I'll just leave it at that. I don't want to open up another can of worms, so I'll just let you make your final statement, and then maybe we can talk again sometime.
Thoughts? Hello? Have I lost you guys?
I'm still here.
Can you hear us, Thoughts? Can you guys hear Thoughts? And maybe I can't hear you.
I can't hear him. Well, I guess we can end it here.
Yeah, I guess so. I was glad that today's discussion did not degenerate into in exchanging insults and the like.
Yeah, it was enjoyable. I had a good time.
Yeah, thank you for joining us, BG. Hopefully we'll have another good topic to talk about at some point.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me. All right, and thanks to Fox. Talk to you guys later.